In Greek mythology, harpies are fearsome creatures known for their hybrid form, possessing the body of a bird and the face of a woman. They were notorious for their swift, terrifying presence, often seen as agents of punishment and chaos. From their origins in ancient myths to their appearances in classic tales, harpies embody the balance between beauty and brutality. Join us as we delve into their fascinating story, exploring their roles in Greek myths and the symbolic meanings that have endured over time. The Harpies, figures of terror and awe in Greek mythology, trace their origins back to ancient texts where they were first described as daughters of the sea god Thaumas and the Oceanid Electra. These ancient creatures were not originally as malevolent as they came to be depicted later. In the earliest accounts, they were more closely associated with the natural forces of the wind. In fact, the very name Harpies comes from the Greek word harpazo, meaning to snatch or to seize, which perfectly encapsulates their role in early myths as beings that could swiftly and suddenly carry away anything in their path. In Homer's epic The Iliad, the Harpies are portrayed as wind spirits capable of snatching people away, often without a trace. They are mentioned in the story of Pandareus' daughters, whom the Harpies whisk away to serve the Furies. This characterization of Harpies as agents of the gods, particularly Zeus, was an important aspect of their mythology, establishing them as forces that could alter human fate in an instant. While in Homer's work their role is more ambiguous, in Hesiod's Theogony they begin to take on a darker tone. Hesiod describes them as lovely-haired, yet terrifying, with speed and fury akin to that of a sudden storm. Hesiod names two Harpies, Aello, meaning storm-swift, and Ocypete, meaning swift-wing, emphasizing their connection to the stormy, violent aspects of nature. Over time, their portrayal grew more fearsome. Harpies came to represent the unrelenting forces of nature, particularly the destructive and chaotic elements. This connection to the wind, specifically violent storms, made them creatures to be feared by sailors and travelers. Yet even as they became more monstrous in some stories, they still retained a kind of otherworldly beauty, representing the dangerous allure of nature's power. Their swift bird-like bodies and female faces highlighted the tension between the beauty of the sky and its terrifying potential for devastation. Perhaps one of the most famous myths involving the Harpies is the story of King Phineus, a king and prophet who found himself on the wrong side of the gods. Phineus, a seer, was given the gift of foresight by the gods, allowing him to foretell the future. However, Phineus either abused his gift or revealed too many of the gods' secrets to mortals, inciting their wrath. As punishment, Zeus cursed him to live in a state of perpetual torment. The Harpies were the instruments of this punishment. Each day, Phineus was served a lavish feast, but before he could eat, the Harpies would swoop down and either steal the food or befoul it, leaving the king starving and miserable. The Harpies' torment was relentless, and Phineus was driven to despair as he wasted away, unable to nourish himself. This particular story highlights the Harpies' role as agents of divine retribution, punishing mortals on behalf of the gods, often in a cruel and inescapable manner. The myth of Phineus serves as a powerful example of the Harpies as enforcers of divine will. Unlike other mythological creatures that acted out of malice or instinct, the Harpies in this tale were sent with a specific purpose, a task that they carried out ruthlessly. Their actions were not random, they were methodical and relentless, emphasizing their role as instruments of punishment rather than creatures of chaotic evil. However, the myth of Phineus also introduced an element of hope. for it was the hero Jason and the Argonauts who eventually came to Phineus's aid. When the Argonauts arrived, they were moved by Phineus's suffering and resolved to help him. Two of the Argonauts, Calais and Zetes, who were the sons of the north wind, Boreas, and possessed wings, chased the Harpies away. According to some versions of the myth, they were able to drive the Harpies off entirely, freeing Phineus from his curse. Other versions suggest that they only managed to scare the Harpies, but either way, the torment ended. This encounter solidified the Harpies as terrifying creatures in myth, one that even the gods deployed to mete out punishment when mortals overstepped their bounds. The myth of Phineus not only cemented the Harpies' reputation, but also placed them in a broader narrative of divine retribution and justice. In many other Greek myths, the Harpies are portrayed in a similar role, as agents of Zeus or other gods, sent to punish those who commit acts of hubris or defy the natural order. They became a physical representation of divine justice, swift, unavoidable, and often cruel. As mythological figures, the Harpies' role was not limited to specific stories, but extended into symbolic representation within Greek culture. In a world where fate and the will of the gods were omnipresent forces, the Harpies embodied the concept of divine retribution. Their very nature, swift and ruthless, made them perfect symbols of punishment that came quickly and unexpectedly, much like the winds they were originally associated with. Just as the wind could change direction without warning, so too could the gods favor or disfavor. In this sense, the Harpies were often seen as reminders of the consequences of moral failings. Their ability to snatch away what was precious, especially food, was not just a form of physical torment, but a symbol of the deprivation that could follow acts of impiety or defiance. The Harpies thus stood as a cautionary symbol in Greek culture, warning against hubris, greed, and the violation of divine or natural law. Beyond their specific mythological appearances, the Harpies came to symbolize moral decay, greed, and the consequences of excess. Their association with stealing food, as in the myth of Phineus, can be seen as a metaphor for greed or gluttony. In a culture that placed great emphasis on moderation and respect for the gods, the Harpies' punishment was a fitting symbol of what could happen when those virtues were abandoned. They served as reminders that those who took too much or disrespected the divine order could have everything stolen from them, often in the most humiliating way. Moreover, the Harpies' punishment was not simply physical, but psychological. The torment of Phineus, for example, was not just that he was hungry, but that he was constantly tantalized by the sight of food he could never eat. The Harpies' method of punishment went beyond mere deprivation. It involved a kind of mental cruelty, a slow and torturous process that gnawed at the victim's hope and sanity. This made them even more terrifying, as they represented not just sudden destruction, but prolonged suffering. A suffering that came directly from divine will. Through their evolution in myth, Harpies became a powerful symbol of the gods' ability to punish those who stepped out of line, a reminder that no matter how powerful or prophetic a mortal might be, the will of the gods was always supreme. Their legacy as divine enforcers cemented them in the pantheon of Greek mythological creatures, not just as monsters, but as symbols of the inescapable consequences that follow acts of hubris and excess. Their image, both in myth and in the cultural imagination of the ancient Greeks, was one of swift, unavoidable justice. Throughout history, the Harpies have captivated the imagination of artists, evolving from their mythological origins into enduring symbols of both beauty and terror. The earliest depictions of harpies in Greek art often portrayed them as winged women with bird-like features. These depictions were not as grotesque as later versions, but rather they emphasized their swift and fearsome nature. In ancient Greek pottery, particularly in the archaic and classical periods, harpies were shown with the bodies of birds and the heads of women, symbolizing their dual nature as both beautiful and terrifying creatures. In vase paintings, harpies often appear in scenes illustrating the myth of Phineus, where they are shown swooping down to snatch food from the tormented king. These early depictions emphasized their speed and their role as agents of divine will, often portraying them in flight, with wings spread wide and sharp talons reaching down toward their victim. The combination of the human and bird-like qualities in these images created a striking contrast that reflected the ambiguous nature of the harpies, both alluring and menacing. As Greek art progressed into the Hellenistic period, the depictions of harpies began to take on a more monstrous and grotesque appearance. Sculptors and painters started to focus on the more fearsome aspects of their character, emphasizing their sharp claws, talons, and vulture-like features. This shift reflected the growing perception of the harpies not merely as wind spirits or agents of the gods, but as terrifying creatures capable of bringing devastation. Their faces, while still vaguely human, were often twisted into expressions of rage or hunger, and their bodies became more distorted, further blurring the line between human and bird. This evolution in artistic representation was influenced by the broader themes of Greek art, which often explored the tension between civilization and chaos, between beauty and the grotesque. The harpies, with their dual nature, were a perfect embodiment of these themes. Their wings and bird-like bodies represented the untamed forces of nature, while their human faces hinted at their connection to the divine and their role as enforcers of moral order. Artists used this combination to create powerful images that spoke to the fear and awe the harpies inspired in ancient culture. The influence of harpy imagery extended far beyond Greece, as their legend spread into Roman art and culture. In Roman frescoes and mosaics, harpies were often depicted in similar ways, but with an added emphasis on their role as punishers of the wicked. Roman artists highlighted their monstrous features, often portraying them as carrion birds scavenging the remains of the dead, or swooping down on those who had angered the gods. The harpies were thus used not just as mythological figures, but as allegories for the consequences of moral failure, representing the inescapable grip of divine retribution. During the Middle Ages, harpy imagery experienced a significant transformation. Christian artists, drawing on classical mythology, incorporated harpies into their own symbolic lexicon, often associating them with sin and damnation. In medieval bestiaries and illuminated manuscripts, harpies were portrayed as demonic figures, embodying the vices of greed, gluttony, and lust. Their bird-like bodies became even more grotesque, with exaggerated claws, hooked beaks, and twisted features, while their human faces retained only a faint resemblance to their earlier, more divine depictions. These medieval representations reinforced the harpy's role as a symbol of chaos and moral corruption, a creature that tormented the souls of the damned and served as a warning to those who strayed from the path of righteousness. The Renaissance saw a revival of classical themes, and with it, a renewed interest in mythological figures like the harpies. Renaissance artists, fascinated by the human form and the ideals of beauty, reimagined the harpies as more elegant, yet still fearsome, creatures. In the works of artists such as Raphael and Michelangelo, the harpy took on a more refined, almost noble appearance, reflecting the Renaissance's focus on the balance between order and chaos. These depictions often highlighted the harpy's dual nature, with their human features rendered with striking beauty, while their wings and claws still retained an element of danger. In sculptures and paintings, the harpies were used to evoke the theme of justice and retribution. In particular, they were often featured in allegorical works that explored the consequences of sin or hubris. The combination of their beautiful yet fearsome appearance served as a powerful reminder of the precarious balance between human ambition and the forces of divine justice. Renaissance artists, with their keen interest in anatomy and naturalism, imbued the harpies with a sense of realism that made them both more relatable and more terrifying. They were no longer purely mythological creatures, but representations of the darker side of human nature and the inevitability of moral consequences. As the centuries progressed, the harpy continued to inspire artists across various mediums, from painting and sculpture to literature and theater. In the 19th century, Romantic artists and writers were particularly drawn to the harpies, seeing them as embodiments of untamed nature and the sublime, a force both beautiful and terrifying. The Romantics, with their fascination with the supernatural and the exotic, embraced the harpy's role as a symbol of chaos and retribution, often using them to explore themes of isolation, madness, and the human struggle against overwhelming forces. In modern times, the harpy has taken on new meanings and interpretations, finding a place in contemporary literature, film, and popular culture. While the basic elements of the harpy myth remain intact, namely their bird-like bodies and human faces, modern storytellers have adapted these creatures to suit new narratives and themes. In fantasy literature, harpies are often portrayed as fierce, independent beings, sometimes allies and sometimes enemies of the heroes. Their monstrous qualities are often emphasized, but they are also given complex personalities, reflecting the modern fascination with moral ambiguity and anti-heroes. In film, harpies frequently appear in horror and fantasy genres, where they serve as embodiments of primal fears and uncontrollable forces. From classic fantasy films like Jason and the Argonauts to more recent depictions in shows like Percy Jackson or The Witcher, harpies are used to symbolize the untamed, chaotic elements of the world, often presenting a direct threat to human order and civilization. In these portrayals, the harpies retain their dual nature, serving as both awe-inspiring and terrifying figures, just as they did in ancient myths. Beyond their use in fiction, harpies have also become a powerful symbol in modern feminist discourse. Their traditional association with feminine beauty and monstrousness has been reinterpreted by some scholars and artists as a commentary on how women who defy societal norms are often demonized or seen as threatening. In this context, the harpy has been reclaimed as a symbol of female power, independence, and defiance against oppressive systems. This reinterpretation highlights the harpy's enduring relevance, as their story continues to resonate with audiences and evolve in meaning. In contemporary visual arts, the harpy continues to inspire artists who are drawn to their complex symbolism. From surrealist paintings to avant-garde sculptures, modern artists use the harpy's mythological legacy to explore themes of transformation, duality, and the intersection of beauty and monstrosity. The harpy's ability to embody multiple, often contradictory qualities makes them a compelling subject for artists seeking to challenge conventional ideas of identity and morality. Ultimately, the Harpies' journey from ancient mythology to modern-day culture reflects the enduring power of their story. Whether portrayed as agents of divine justice, symbols of moral decay, or embodiments of female strength and defiance, the Harpies continue to captivate and inspire, proving that their legacy will endure for generations to come.